Could a major American city become unlivable within our lifetimes? Not a small town that dries up when the mine closes. Not a village abandoned to the sea. A city of millions, in the wealthiest country on earth, becoming a place that human beings can no longer live. Most people's instinct is that the answer is obviously no. Unlivability is something that happens somewhere else, in poorer places, in a distant future. America is too rich, too advanced, too capable of engineering its way out of anything. And Phoenix, Arizona is the city that puts that assumption to the test, because Phoenix is the place where the machinery that holds a modern city together in a hostile environment is running closest to its limit. But before we can ask whether Phoenix could become unlivable, we have to be honest about what that word actually means, because it is almost always misunderstood, and the misunderstanding is what makes people dismiss the question. Unlivable does not mean everyone drops dead. It does not mean the city empties overnight into a ghost town. The real meaning is stranger and far closer, and once you understand it, you will realize that in the only sense that matters, Phoenix has already crossed a line that no major American city has crossed before. And the growth is not slowing down. It is speeding up. So let us define it properly. There are, in truth, two kinds of livable places on Earth, and we almost never name the difference. There are naturally livable places, where a human being can simply survive with the environment, walk through it, work in it, sleep in it, and stay alive without help. And there are artificially livable places, where a person can only survive inside machines that hold the real environment at bay, and where stepping fully into that real environment for long enough will kill them. For essentially all of human history, every city on the planet was the first kind. You could survive outside. Phoenix, for a growing portion of every single year, has become the second kind. This is not an exaggeration or a projection. It is a plain physical fact. Strip away the air conditioning, and no one could survive a Phoenix summer. The city exists, in July and August, entirely by artificial means. It is a place that is already, functionally, unlivable in the raw, and inhabited only because the machines are running. Which completely reframes the question in the title. Could Phoenix become unlivable? Is really a different question. It is, could the machinery that already makes Phoenix livable fail, or fail to keep up? And to answer that, we first have to be honest about exactly what kind of danger Phoenix actually faces, because the popular version of it is wrong, and I am not going to sell you the wrong version. You have probably heard about the wet bulb temperature. The idea that there is a threshold, around 35 degrees Celsius on the wet bulb scale, past which a healthy person sitting in the shade, with water, will die within a few hours, because the air is so saturated with humidity that sweat can no longer evaporate, and the body cannot cool itself. That threshold is real, and it is a genuine, looming threat for humid places, for the Persian Gulf, for parts of South Asia, where heat and high humidity combine. But that is not Phoenix. Phoenix is bone dry. And in dry heat, the physics run the other way. Your sweat evaporates freely, which is your body's most powerful cooling tool, so a person who is hydrated, who can find shade, who has working cooling, can survive astonishing air temperatures in dry desert heat. Phoenix is not going to hit a wet bulb deathline and have everyone collapse in the shade. That is not the mechanism, and any video that tells you it is misleading you. Phoenix's path to unlivability is different, and subtler, and understanding it correctly is the entire point. It comes not from a single lethal threshold, but from three things stacked on top of each other. The first is relentlessness. Phoenix's danger is not one brutal afternoon. It is the sheer grinding duration of the heat. In 2024, Phoenix endured 113 consecutive days at or above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the longest such streak ever recorded, a full month longer than the old record. 70 of those days reached at least 110. That is not weather. That is a season-long thermal siege. a load that accumulates in human bodies and in the concrete and steel of the city itself, day after day, for a third of the year. The second is that the nights no longer cool. The one thing dry heat survivability depends on is recovery, the chance for a body to shed its accumulated heat after dark. But Phoenix has paved itself into one of the most intense urban heat islands in the country. And all that asphalt and concrete soaks up the sun all day and radiates it back all night, so the temperature barely falls. The recovery window closes. The body never gets to reset before the next day's siege begins. And the third, the decisive one, is this. Dry heat is survivable if you can sweat, hydrate, and cool. But sweating and hydrating require water, and cooling requires power. And both of those require the systems, the grid and the water supply, to keep working. Phoenix's survivability is not a property of the human body in the desert. It is entirely conditional on infrastructure. The desert does not kill you as long as the machines run. But the machines are the city. And that conditionality, that total dependence, is the whole vulnerability. Which brings us to the single most important piece of research anyone has done on this question, and the moment the abstraction becomes a hard number. In 2023, a team of researchers led by Brian Stone Jr., a professor of city and regional planning at the Georgia Institute of Technology, working together with David Hondula, who happens to be the city of Phoenix's own first director of heat response and mitigation, decided to model a specific concrete scenario. They asked what would happen if one of Phoenix's real historical heat waves, the 5-day event of July 2006, when afternoon temperatures averaged 113 degrees, were to repeat itself, and the electrical grid failed at the same time. The results, published in the journal Environmental Science and Technology, are among the most alarming projections in American climate science. In that scenario, a multi-day blackout during a major heat wave, roughly half of Phoenix's population, on the order of 800,000 people, would require emergency medical care for heat stroke and other heat-related illness. And about 1% of the population, roughly 13,000 people, would die, in a city that has fewer than 3,000 emergency room beds. The heat-related death rate would not rise a little, it would spike by around 700%. Sit with that for a moment, because it is the clearest possible picture of what unlivable actually means. It is not a slow, century-long decline. It is a 5-day window in which the machines stop, and a modern American city of millions becomes a mass casualty event on a scale that would overwhelm every hospital in the region many times over. And here's the part that should end any comfort you were holding on to. These numbers are not a projection about the distant, warmer future. Brian Stone was explicit that they are grounded in today's climate. This is the risk that exists right now, and the study projects that the toll would roughly double by later this century as the heat intensifies. But there is a deeper insight buried in that study, and it is the key to the whole idea of an unlivable city, because it is completely counterintuitive. You would assume that Phoenix, of all cities, would be well adapted to heat. It has lived with it for a century. But Stone found the opposite, and the reason is chilling in its simplicity. Phoenix residents are actually less able to survive extreme heat than you would expect, precisely because they depend so completely on air conditioning. A person who spends their entire summer moving between cooled spaces held at 72 degrees has no acclimatization. Their body has never adapted to heat, never built the physiological tolerance that people in less air-conditioned places retain. So when the cooling fails, and they are suddenly exposed to 113 degrees, the sheer size of that swing, from an artificial 72 to a raw 113, is itself dangerous enough to cause heat illness or death. That is the trap of artificial livability, and it is worth stating plainly, because it applies to every city that follows this path. An artificially livable city is not merely dependent on its machines. It is deskilled by them. The population loses the natural resilience it would have had in a place with less cooling, which means that when the machine stops, people are more helpless, not less. The better and more total the cooling, the more catastrophic the failure. Phoenix has engineered itself into a condition where the thing keeping it alive has also stripped away its ability to survive without that thing. And it is now proposing to do this at a larger and larger scale, which is where we should be honest about that word in the title, megacity, because it matters. And turning it over honestly actually sharpens the whole point rather than blunting it. Phoenix is not technically a megacity yet. That term, in its strict definition, means a metropolitan area of 10 million people or more. And Metro Phoenix is around 5 million. So if you want to be pedantic, the title is describing something that does not quite exist yet. But that is exactly the point, and it is the opposite of reassuring. The question is not about a 10 million person city that already exists in a hostile climate. It is about whether we are building one, right now, in a place that may not be able to sustain it. Because through every bit of this, the heat records, the blackout warnings, the water crisis, Phoenix is one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the entire United States. It keeps adding residents by the hundreds of thousands. It keeps approving new homes, keeps expanding outward across the desert, keeps enlarging the artificially livable footprint that must be cooled and watered and held against the environment. The city is not retreating from the edge it is standing on. It is sprinting toward mega-city scale in the one American environment least equipped to support a city that size. That is the real meaning of could become in the title. It is not a passive fate that might befall Phoenix. It is an active choice, being made in real time to keep building a bigger and bigger machine in a place where the machine failing is a mass casualty event. And that scale question connects directly to the most important thing about unlivability, which is that it does not arrive for everyone at once. It arrives first for specific people. And in Phoenix, it already has. In a city kept alive by cooling, unlivability arrives first for whoever's cooling fails. And that failure is happening every single summer, quietly, one household at a time, long before any citywide blackout. Maricopa County, which contains Phoenix, recorded 645 heat-related deaths in 2023, and 602 in 2024. Numbers so high that the county's chief medical examiner said his office had begun approaching recent summers like a mass casualty event. During one 44-day stretch in the summer of 2024, a heat-related death occurred in the county every single day. And when you look at who died, the whole argument crystallizes into a single statistic. About half of the people who died from heat were experiencing homelessness. People for whom the outdoors is already, functionally, an unlivable environment with no machine at all between them and the desert, and among the people who died indoors, inside their own homes. 88% had an air conditioner in the residence, but 70% of those air conditioners were not working. That sentence is the entire thesis of this video. Compressed, the city is already unlivable today for the specific people whose machine has stopped. The great blackout scenario that Brian Stone modeled is not a new kind of event. It is that exact failure, the stopped air conditioner, scaled up from one apartment to the entire electrical grid. What kills 13,000 people in the blackout study is the same thing that kills 600 people every ordinary summer. The only variable is how many machines fail at once. Picture it at the smallest scale. An older resident, alone in a low-income apartment on the edge of the metro, during the July stretch when the outside temperature holds at 116 for days. The window air conditioning unit is broken, or it has been switched off to keep the electricity bill survivable. The inside of the apartment has climbed past 100 degrees and stays there through a night that never cools. And this is a body that has spent its entire life at 72 degrees, with no adaptation to heat whatsoever, now facing 116 with no cooling and no help and no one checking. For that person, unlivable is not a question about the future of the city. It is this afternoon, in that room, Multiply that room by a grid failure, and you have the study. So why Phoenix, specifically? Of all American cities, why is this the leading candidate to be the first major one to cross into unlivability? And why am I saying could and not will? Phoenix is the candidate because it stacks together three things that no other large American metro combines. It has the most extreme urban heat in the country, and it is rising fastest. Over the last 5 years, Phoenix has averaged around 40 days a year at or above 110 degrees, up from about 5 days a century ago. It has, at the same time, the most precarious water supply of any major western city, dependent on the lowest priority water on a shrinking Colorado River, backed up by a groundwater aquifer that the state's own analysis says has reached its limits, which means the very water that the cooling and the hydration depend on is itself under threat. And it has the fastest growth, piling ever more demand onto both of those failing systems. Extreme heat, fragile water, explosive growth. No other big American city carries all three at once. That is why, if any major American city becomes unlivable first, the smart money is on this one. But could is doing real and honest work in that sentence, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, because the truth is not the cheap doom version. Phoenix is, in crucial ways, also, the best prepared city in America for exactly this threat. It created the nation's first municipal government office dedicated entirely to heat response and mitigation, the office David Hondula runs. It operates cooling centers around the clock, and the results are real. In 2024, even as the heat set new records, heat deaths in the county actually fell for the first time in a decade because the interventions work. Its electric utilities plan their systems for a 117-degree day and deliberately carry large reserve margins on top of that. And they consider the specific nightmare, a total grid failure coinciding with a peak heat wave, to be a genuinely low probability event. Arizona, as we have seen, has some of the strongest water law in the country. Phoenix is not sleepwalking. It is more awake to this danger than almost anywhere. So the honest conclusion is not a prophecy that Phoenix is doomed. It is a warning about a trajectory. Whether Phoenix becomes America's first unlivable major city is not written in the physics of the desert. It will be decided by human choices, about how resilient the grid is made, about whether the water holds, about how fast and how far the city keeps growing, and above all, about whether the cooling reaches the people most likely to die without it. Those choices are being made right now, and they can bend the trajectory or fulfill it. So here is the whole thing, honestly, in one piece. Phoenix is not going to become unlivable the way a lazy doom story imagines, a wet bulb deathline, everyone fleeing at once, a sudden ghost town. It is already unlivable in the only sense that truly matters, as a place that cannot be survived without machines for months of every year. The real question was never whether that is true. It is whether the machines can be kept running, and kept ahead of a climate that keeps getting hotter and a population that keeps getting bigger, and made to reach the poorest and the most exposed, who are the ones the failure finds first. The blackout study is the shape of what happens when the machines stop. The 70% of broken air conditioners is the shape of who it reaches first. And the relentless, accelerating growth is the shape of the risk being taken, deliberately, every year. So picture the object that holds all of it. A single window air conditioner, running against a 116-degree afternoon. The thin humming machine that stands between one apartment and the desert. Now multiply it across a metropolitan area of 5 million people and counting, every one of them living on the same conditional bargain, livable as long as the power holds, and the water comes and the bill gets paid. And out past the newest subdivisions, past the last cul-de-sac where the cooled air ends. The desert that was always there presses right up against the edge of the city, exactly as hot as it has ever been. Exactly as hot as it was before anyone built anything, waiting with the patience of a thing that does not need electricity, and has nowhere it needs to be. Phoenix could become America's first unlivable major city, not because the desert is going to change. The desert is not the variable. The variable is that we keep building a larger and larger city that can only be inhabited by holding that unchanging desert back, machine by machine, gallon by gallon, grid by grid. And the desert only has to win once.